I never thought I'd get a second chance at life, but here I was, determined to avoid every possible encounter with Mia. The memories of my past life haunted me like a shadow that refused to fade. It's funny how differently you see things when you know the whole story. In my first life, I was blind to the truth, but now every little detail made perfect sense. Life seemed to play a game of chase between us. When Mia moved west for work, I quickly chose Southwest University. When she bought a house and started planning her wedding life in the West, I made sure to settle down in the North. I couldn't blame her anymore, knowing how deeply she loved Parker all along. Her dedication to him was something I never noticed before, too caught up in my own world to see the signs. The most painful part? They even raised a child together in secret. My own daughter, Olivia, was so touched by their pure love that she chose to become part of their family. This all happened right under my nose, and I only discovered it moments before my death in my past life. That's when I decided to change everything. The moment I was reborn, I rushed to the marriage registration office to get back our certificate. I still remember the confused look on the secretary's face when I asked for it back. "Having second thoughts about getting married?" she asked. I just made up an excuse about wrong information, promising to return it after corrections. As soon as I stepped outside, I threw that certificate in the trash. It felt like throwing away 60 years of lies. Looking back, all the signs were there. After we filed for marriage in my past life, Mia grew more distant each day. I foolishly thought it was just her personality, but now I know better. It took my daughter's careless words in my final moments to reveal the truth. Mia and Uncle Parker had found their happy ending after all. Our marriage was nothing but an empty shell. Every time Mia transferred to a new place, it was always far from me. Now I understand she was trying to be close to Parker. In 60 years of marriage, we barely spent 1 year living together. Parker, ever devoted to her, followed her everywhere she went. He even became her personal doctor, silently staying by her side, loving her from a distance. The story of their secret life together breaks my heart even now. They adopted a child, and Parker's child called Mia Mother. The worst part? My own daughter wished for my death so these star-crossed lovers could finally be together openly. Standing in front of our old house now, I feel strange. In my past life, this place was supposed to host our wedding in a month. After we got married, Mia moved to the West, claiming the conditions there were too harsh for me to follow. I stayed behind like a fool, spending 30 years in this house. Little did I know that Parker had followed her just 6 months after she left. Their lives were woven together like a tapestry I couldn't see at the time. Every day, I worried about Mia being all alone in that faraway place. I kept asking to join her, but she always found reasons to keep me away. Now I know why. She was never alone. She had Parker by her side all along, someone who truly knew her heart. Meanwhile, I stayed behind in this town like a faithful dog, never leaving because she asked me to. Coming home that day felt different. Mia wasn't back yet, so I went straight to our room. There, in the bottom drawer of our old cabinet, I found something that brought back painful memories: my college acceptance letter from my past life. It was a reminder of dreams I had to give up. Back then, right after Mia and I got married, she moved west for work. Then my mother-in-law suddenly collapsed, and someone needed to stay behind to take care of the house. That's how I gave up my chance to study at Southwest University, a decision that haunted me until my dying day in my previous life. Running my fingers over the letter, seeing my name and the bright red university stamp, I almost broke down crying. The memories of my final days in my past life came flooding back. Parker and my daughter would visit me as I lay dying. Parker came every day, pretending to care. But when we were alone, his true colors showed. His words were like poison-tipped arrows aimed at my heart. He took pleasure in telling me how worthless I was as a husband. According to him, He was the one who stood by Mia through everything, not me. In his eyes, I was nothing more than a free babysitter, someone to look after the old folks and children. The worst part? I was too weak to fight back. I had to watch helplessly as my own daughter treated him like her real father. When I took my last breath, she didn't even cry. She just sighed with relief, happy that Uncle could finally have what he wanted. I carefully put the acceptance letter away and started making dinner, trying to push these painful memories aside. When Mia came home that evening, she was completely soaked and looked exhausted. It reminded me of that same day in my past life. I had bought lots of food to celebrate after finding out she had filed our marriage certificate. She had come home late then too, dripping wet, but wouldn't tell me why when I asked. She just gave me the cold shoulder. It wasn't until much later that I learned the truth. Parker had fallen into the river that day, and Mia had jumped in to save him. I laughed bitterly at the memory. Now I understood. Parker must have found out about our marriage certificate and tried to kill himself. That explained why Mia was so cold to me that night. She probably blamed me for pushing Parker to such extremes. But how was any of this my fault? She was the one who wanted to get married. She was the one who filed the marriage certificate. She was the one who promised to spend her life with me. Yet somehow, I became the villain in their love story, the obstacle standing between two star-crossed lovers. The irony of it all still breaks my heart. This time, when Mia came home soaking wet, I didn't rush to take care of her like I did in my past life. Instead, I just kept cooking, pretending not to notice. Our water heater wasn't working, so she had to change into dry clothes without a hot shower. During dinner, I could hear her sneezing over and over, but I acted like I couldn't hear a thing. While I was washing dishes later, I watched from the corner of my eye as she paced around the living room like a caged animal. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed her coat, mumbled something about going out for a while, and practically ran out the door. After she left, I walked over to the old yellow poster on our wall and made another mark on it. Just one more mark to go, and I could finally leave this place behind. Mia didn't come back until the sky was starting to lighten. I heard her trying to sneak in quietly from the next room, her footsteps as soft as cat paws, but I pretended to be fast asleep. The next morning, I thought Mia had gone to work and was getting ready to buy my train ticket when I heard coughing coming from her room. My hand froze for a moment as I held my breakfast bowl, but I forced myself to keep eating as if I hadn't heard anything. After breakfast, I knew I had to hurry to the train station. Tickets were hard to get this time of year, and the lines would be endless, but I needed that ticket. Having it in my hands would make everything feel more real, more certain. Just as I was heading out, someone knocked on our door. When I opened it, there stood Parker, looking young and pale-faced. He could barely look me in the eye, staring at his feet as he whispered, "Ethan, I'm looking for Mia." Anyone passing by would think something suspicious was going on between them, but I didn't have time for their love story drama today. I didn't even bother closing the door, just walked past him and headed down the stairs. I made a few stops along the way, buying rice at the store and asking around about train schedules. By the time I got to the station, it was almost 10 in the morning, and the place was packed with people. Even though the line stretched forever, I picked the shortest one and waited. Hours passed, and just as the staff was about to take their lunch break, it was finally my turn, only to find out all the seats to my destination were sold out. Without missing a beat, I bought a standing ticket for the earliest train available. I carefully tucked the ticket away where no one would find it and rushed back home on my bike. Part of me was worried about what I might find when I got back. Would I walk in on some romantic scene between the star-crossed lovers? But when I opened the door, I found Mia sitting alone in the living room, her bedroom door wide open like she was trying to prove something. When she saw me, I could tell she wanted to say something, probably explain why Parker had come by, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. I just turned away and went to the kitchen, my stomach growling for dinner. As we ate, I could feel her eyes on me, silently begging to explain, but I kept my focus on my food. Eventually, she gave up trying to break the silence between us. When Mia finally looked up at me and started to say, "Ethan, I cut her off with a casual, 'Just eat your dinner, no talking.' I was throwing her own words back at her, the same ones she used to silence me in my past life. I could see her swallow her words, and inside, I felt a small, bitter satisfaction. In my previous life, I was always the one trying to start conversations, but whenever I brought up certain topics, she would either shut down completely or simply say, 'Don't talk while eating.' Back then, I blamed myself, thinking I wasn't good at expressing my thoughts. Now I know better. Trying to talk to someone who never meant to listen is always pointless. Whatever explanation she wanted to give me now didn't matter anymore. After dinner, I went to my room and started gathering all the wedding gifts I had bought for our future marriage that would never happen now. As I packed everything into a large bag, I thought about my cousin who was getting married later in the year. He didn't have much money, so it seemed right to give him these expensive items rather than let them go to waste. I found an old sack and stuffed all the clothes inside, planning to take them to him tomorrow. These items that once represented my hopes for the future now felt like heavy reminders of a life I needed to leave behind. The next morning, after Mia left for work, I carried the heavy sack to my mother's house. My mother immediately thought Mia and I had gotten into some big fight, worrying it might affect my studies at the university. I had to come up with a story to calm her down, telling her I needed to buy new clothes and didn't have space to store the old ones, so I was bringing them home early. She believed me and finally stopped worrying. I knew if she found out I was planning to cancel the wedding with Mia, she would probably chase me down the street with a broom. Our family's history ran deep. Both our parents worked at the same state-owned company, and Mia and I had grown up knowing each other since we were kids. Everyone thought we were perfect together. Mia was always the star, beautiful, smart, with a great job. My mother absolutely adored her. When a matchmaker suggested us as a couple, both families jumped at the idea, thinking we would be perfect together. At first, I couldn't believe someone like Mia would ever be interested in me. She was so beautiful and successful, and I was just ordinary. But then my mother came home one day, practically dancing with joy, telling me that Mia had feelings for me too. Everything moved so quickly after that. Before I knew it, our families had arranged our engagement just a month ago. My mother kept telling me how lucky I was, saying finding another wife like Mia would be as rare as finding a lantern that could shine as bright as the moon. She made it clear that if I let Mia slip away, she'd never forgive me. Looking back now, I realize I always felt a bit unsure around Mia. The whole thing felt too good to be true. How could someone like her really want to be my wife? Sometimes I noticed how distant she could be, but I made excuses for her, blaming it on her demanding job. I was so blind. All along, Mia had been caught between two loves, me and Parker. Now I understand she probably chose me simply because I was the safe choice, the one both families approved of. The thought of being someone's second choice, their backup plan, made my stomach turn. Finally, with the marriage certificate gone, everything between Mia and me was over. As I left my mother's house, I felt lighter than I had in years. On my way home, I treated myself to an ice cream from a street vendor, enjoying the simple pleasure I hadn't allowed myself in so long. But life has a funny way of testing us. As I walked home, licking my ice cream, I heard familiar voices arguing. The scene that unfolded before me felt like watching a play I'd seen before. But this time, I knew all the hidden meanings. "Yin, please don't force me. I can't accept this," Parker was saying in that gentle voice of his, the same voice that had mocked me on my deathbed in my past life. Mia was there too, trying to balance her bicycle with one hand while pushing a bag of rice at Parker with the other. "Just take it, Parker," she insisted. "This rice would just go to waste with me, but it could feed you for half a month. At least let me do this much." They kept pushing and pulling the bag between them like children fighting over a toy. Then Parker spotted me. The way he immediately moved to stand between Mia and me spoke volumes. It was pure instinct, the kind of protective gesture that comes from years of caring for someone. His face turned white as a sheet, but his eyes held firm. "We really have nothing going on," he stammered. "Please don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to steal Mia away. If you're angry, be angry at me." He stood there, pale but determined, like a man ready to face his punishment. Behind him, Mia stared at me with the same scared white face. I walked past them without even stopping, as if they were strangers on the street. Inside, I laughed at my bad luck. Even trying to enjoy a simple ice cream, I couldn't avoid running into the very people I wanted to forget. When I got home, Mia wasn't far behind me. For once, her usually blank face showed real emotion. "Ethan, please, listen to me," she begged. I gave her a bored look. "Go ahead," I said, even though I couldn't care less about what she had to say. She seemed relieved that I wasn't yelling or throwing things. "I knew you wouldn't misunderstand," she said, and I had to hold back a bitter laugh. She took her time choosing her words, like someone walking through a field of landmines. "It's not what you think," she started, her voice trying to sound sincere. I just watched her with a blank face, waiting to hear what story she'd come up with. "I got hurt once on my way to the hospital. Parker helped bandage me up and took me there. After that, whenever I went back for checkups, I kept running into him." She paused, watching my face carefully. "I heard he was having money problems, so I thought I should help him a little." As she spoke, I couldn't help but think about all these coincidences, meeting at the hospital, running into each other during checkups. Did she really think I was that stupid? No grown woman could be this naive. She was playing innocent, but I knew better now. The thing that really got to me was the rice we'd bought for our wedding. Somehow feeding Parker was more important than keeping it for our supposed future together. Even though I had promised myself not to care anymore, I couldn't help taking a small dig at her about the rice. I watched as Mia's face changed, a hint of shame crossing her features. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly, but we both knew she was lying to herself as much as to me. After a moment of heavy silence, I decided to be direct. "Have you ever thought about calling off the wedding?" I had my reasons for asking. If Mia was the one to suggest ending things, my mother might take it better. Maybe she'd still cry and make a scene, but it wouldn't be as bad. I was also thinking about how, in my past life, Mia had slowly pulled away after we filed for marriage, probably regretting her decision even then. Breaking things off now seemed like the kindest thing we could do for each other. But Mia's reaction caught me off guard. Her forehead wrinkled in a deep frown. "Do you think marriage is some kind of game?" she snapped. "We can't just decide not to get married on a whim. I'm a woman. What will people think of me?" I wanted to laugh at how ridiculous it all was. All right, I get it," I said, putting my hands up like I was surrendering. I had no energy left for another one of her lectures. Instead, I went to my room, thinking I'd rather spend my time planning how to invest in stocks than listen to more of her excuses. Money was going to be a problem, though. My parents had been so happy about Mia that they'd emptied their life savings to help pay for our wedding. I opened my safe, took out the money, and carefully wrapped it in cloth. I couldn't give it back to them now. It would raise too many questions. So I decided to use it as starting money for my investments. If my mother eventually found out and started screaming at me, I could always show her how I'd grown her money instead of wasting it. Maybe that would calm her down. The next morning, the first thing I did was make another mark on that old yellow poster on the wall. Just 8 more days until I could finally leave this place behind. I was so focused on counting the marks that I didn't hear anyone come up behind me. "What are you writing?" Mia's deep voice suddenly came from right behind me. I jumped and spun around to find her standing there, looking curious. She was standing so close I could feel her breath on my ear, making my skin crawl. I stepped back, disgusted by how my body still reacted to her nearness. I was about to make up some excuse, but she kept staring at the poster, so I had to think fast. "I'm counting the days since you submitted our marriage registration," I said, trying to sound casual. Something about my answer seemed to make her happy. The worry disappeared from her face, replaced by obvious relief. She let out a soft breath, and her hand, which had been hidden behind her back, finally relaxed. In her palm was a small box covered in dark velvet. "Open it," she said, looking at me with hopeful eyes. The irony hit me hard. In my past life, we'd been married for 50 long years. We'd raised a daughter together, buried both sets of parents, shared a lifetime of moments. Yet in all that time, she had never once given me a gift. Now here she was, holding out this box like a peace offering. "What's wrong?" she asked when I didn't move. "Go ahead and open it." I took a deep breath, looking at the velvet box in my hands, before gently pushing it back toward Mia. "Keep it," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Give it to me after our marriage certificate is approved." Of course, I knew that certificate would never exist in this lifetime. I couldn't help the small smile that crept onto my face at the thought. Mia stared down at the box in her hands and let out a soft sigh. "Okay, I'll hold on to it until the registration goes through," she said quietly. I could see the disappointment written all over her face. She'd probably spent a lot of time picking out this gift, hoping for a different reaction from me. But how could a simple present make up for 50 years of lies and heartbreak from my past life? That morning after breakfast, Mia got ready to leave for work. Before walking out the door, she turned to me with a hopeful smile, saying she'd come home early so we could go see a movie together. I didn't say yes or no, just watched her leave in silence. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed the bags I'd packed the night before and left a quick note on the living room table, saying I was visiting my uncle for a few days. The bus ride to the neighboring town took longer than I remembered, and it was almost noon by the time I arrived. My uncle and aunt weren't expecting me, so when I showed up at their door with my big bundle of belongings, they jumped up from their lunch to welcome me. But it was my grandmother's reaction that really got to me. Her face lit up like a festival lantern when she saw me, and she pulled me into a tight hug that seemed to squeeze all the air from my lungs. Seeing my grandmother alive and well hit me hard. In my past life, we'd lost her too early, and being able to hold her again made my heart feel like it might burst. She only had 2 children, and everyone knew I was her favorite grandchild, even more than my cousins. This time around, I'd brought not just the wedding gifts I'd planned to give them, but also lots of health supplements and supplies especially for her. I wasn't going to waste this second chance to take care of her. We spent hours just talking, catching up on everything. My uncle, bless his heart, snuck out to catch a chicken for a special meal in my honor. I knew better than to try to stop him. When Uncle decided to celebrate, there was no changing his mind. My aunt, though, couldn't stop staring at all the things I'd brought. When I started unpacking everything, her eyes got bigger and bigger until she couldn't even speak. I just laughed and said, "Mom told me to bring these over. If you want to thank anyone, thank her." I knew I'd have to face my mother's anger when I eventually went home. What was one more thing for her to be mad about? At this point, I'd accepted my fate. When my relatives heard that my mother had supposedly sent the gifts, they seemed to relax a bit. My aunt still looked worried about how much stuff there was, but my grandmother just waved her hand like it was nothing. "What's the fuss about?" she said. "A bride leaving home should bring gifts. It's perfectly normal." Life at my grandmother's house felt like stepping into a warm bath after a long, cold day. During the daytime, she'd cook all my favorite foods, filling the house with amazing smells. In the evenings, my cousin and I would sit together, talking about everything and nothing until late into the night. For the first time in either of my lives, I felt truly at peace. Life wasn't easy for my uncle and aunt. They worked hard just to get by. My aunt spent her days selling sweet potatoes near a factory, setting up her small stall early in the morning and staying until the evening crowds thinned. My uncle took whatever work he could find, sometimes as a handyman, other times helping at construction sites. Their hands were rough from work, but their hearts remained gentle. One sunny afternoon, I went with my aunt to her sweet potato stall. While helping her arrange the potatoes on the wooden cart, I noticed something interesting: a small stall across the street selling colorful hair clips, bands, and pins. Young factory workers often stopped there, picking up little accessories to brighten their day. The owner seemed busy, her cash box filling up steadily. "Aunt," I said carefully, watching her wrap a hot sweet potato in paper for a customer, "have you ever thought about selling other things besides potatoes, like those hair clips over there?" I pointed to the busy stall. My aunt wiped her hands on her apron and shook her head. "We don't know where to get those things," she explained. "And starting something new costs money. Money we don't have. Plus, there are already others selling those items." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had thought about better opportunities, but couldn't see a way to reach them. My heart ached as memories from my past life surfaced. I remembered how my uncle and aunt had grown old before their time. Worry lines etched deep in their faces as they struggled to make ends meet. They had always shown me love, sharing whatever little they had. This time around, I was determined to help them find a better path. Over the next few days, I started talking more about small businesses. I would point out busy stalls, mention how certain items seemed popular, and share little stories about successful vendors I'd heard about. I noticed my aunt listening more carefully, her eyes following customers at nearby stalls with growing interest. Then one evening, while we were cleaning up her stall, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Do you really think selling accessories could make more money than sweet potatoes?" Her voice was quiet, but I could hear the hope in it. I knew then that the seed I'd planted had taken root. I decided to stay at my grandmother's house longer than planned. School could wait. This was more important. Every day, I visited the accessory stall, becoming friendly with the owner. We talked about business, and eventually, she mentioned where she bought her stock. It was the information I'd been waiting for. My aunt, my cousin, and I made the trip to the wholesale market together. The excitement in their eyes as they picked out their first batch of inventory made all the planning worthwhile. We spent hours choosing colors and styles that would appeal to the factory workers, making sure to stay within their budget. 2 days later, with their new business taking its first steps, I felt ready to head home. My aunt hugged me tightly before I left, whispering thank you in my ear. My heart felt lighter knowing I'd helped set them on a new path. Back home, exhausted but satisfied, I fell into bed and slept deeply. When I woke up, the sun had set, and delicious cooking smells filled the house. Walking out of my room, I heard laughter from the kitchen. What I saw made me stop cold. Mia and Parker, cooking together, looking far too comfortable in my kitchen. I leaned against the doorway, watching them silently. Parker came out carrying a plate, and when he saw me, he jumped in surprise, dropping it. The crash brought Mia running, but she froze when she saw me standing there. The silence stretched thick and heavy between us. "Well," I finally said, my voice cool and steady, "you two look like you're having fun. Should I leave you alone?" Mia backed away quickly, but Parker stood his ground, staring at me with defiant eyes. "Go home," I told him firmly. He just stood there, jaw clenched, refusing to move. The laugh that came from my throat was cold and empty. "Are you telling me I need permission to be in my own house?" My words hit their mark. Parker stumbled backward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "That's not what I—" But Mia jumped in before he could finish, her face tight with anger. "What's wrong with you? He's just here for dinner. He's been studying late and has no one to cook for him. I made too much food since you weren't home. so I invited him over. You're making something out of nothing. She had moved to stand between us, trying to protect Parker like he was some innocent child. Without thinking twice, my hand moved through the air and connected with her cheek. The sound echoed through the kitchen. Mia stood there frozen, her hand slowly rising to touch the spot where I'd slapped her. I could tell by her wide eyes that she never thought I would fight back. Over her shoulder, I caught Parker's face, that little smirk playing on his lips, his eyes full of mockery. It made me want to laugh again, but this time, I held it in. Instead, I walked over to the old poster hanging on the wall. Picking up a pen, I added another mark to it, my movements slow and deliberate. Just 2 more marks to go. 2 more days until I could walk away from these 2 people who had caused me so much pain. 2 more days until freedom. After Parker finally left, Mia stared at the poster, her forehead wrinkled in confusion. Something about those marks bothered her, but she couldn't figure out why. Her face changed, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't have all the pieces to. "Ethan," she said softly, breaking the silence. I turned to look at her, keeping my face blank and empty. "What?" She shifted on her feet, nervous. "There's really nothing going on between me and Parker." I didn't want to hear her lies anymore. I picked up my chopsticks and started eating, acting like she wasn't even there. My silence seemed to work. She stopped talking and just stood there, lost for words. Later that night, while I was unpacking my things from grandmother's house, Mia spoke up again. "Ethan, why does your room look emptier than before?" I kept quiet, continuing to sort through my belongings. "You had so many wedding things in here before," she pressed on, her voice shaking slightly. When I didn't answer, she rushed to add, "I was thinking, since we're already registered to get married, maybe we could start decorating the room bit by bit. You bought all those decorative papers and patterns. Where are they? I could put them up." I almost laughed out loud. Decorations? What was the point? If she wanted decorations so badly, she could go get them from my cousin's house. But I didn't feel like arguing. "It's too early," I said flatly. "Let's wait a few days." Mia's shoulders relaxed at my words, thinking I was trying to make her feel better. She didn't understand what I really meant. The next morning, she surprised me by making breakfast. After we ate, instead of leaving for work, she stayed home. I ignored her completely, walking to the wall where I carefully drew another mark on the poster. Just 1 more day. At 6 a.m. tomorrow, I would be gone forever. As I finished making the mark, Mia smiled brightly. "Don't worry, our marriage certificate should be approved any day now." I didn't even look at her, just kept cleaning up the breakfast dishes. But she wasn't done. She stayed right where she was, her face lighting up as she turned to me again. "We should go clothes shopping together since we're getting married soon," Mia suggested, her voice hopeful. I thought about it for a moment. She had a point. I did need new clothes for when I left for school. Without saying anything, I went to my room to get money. Seeing that I was going along with her idea, Mia let out a quiet breath of relief. But we never made it to any stores that day. As soon as we opened the front door, we saw him. Parker was there, leaning against the wall like he'd been waiting all night long. His clothes were wrinkled, and his hair was messy. Mia ran to him right away, pushing at his shoulder gently. "Parker, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice full of worry. He opened his eyes slowly, and when he saw us both standing there, he straightened up. "Ethan, I'm sorry about what happened yesterday," he said softly. Then, his eyes suddenly closed, and he fell forward toward Mia like a puppet with cut strings. The change in Mia's face was instant. Worry turned to panic as she caught him before he could hit the ground. "Parker, wake up!" she cried out, shaking him. I watched this little show for a moment before crouching down and pressing my fingers against the pressure point above his upper lip. I felt Parker's body tense up for just a split second before he forced himself to stay limp. I had to admit, He was putting on quite a performance. When I reached out to press the pressure point again, Mia quickly pushed my hand away, almost like she was protecting him. "He's not eating well, and his blood is weak," she said in a rush. "I need to get him to the hospital." Without even looking back at me, she helped Parker up and hurried away. I didn't bother closing the door behind them. Instead, I took my time walking to the hospital, following their path at my own pace. When I got there, I found Mia standing next to Parker's hospital bed, looking worried after talking to the doctor. When she turned and saw me standing there, her whole body went stiff with surprise. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice shaking a little. I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked at Parker lying in the hospital bed. He wasn't particularly good-looking. If anything, his skinny body and hollow cheeks made him look weak and pitiful. Then I turned to look at Mia. So this was the kind of man she liked. When I stared at her, she couldn't even look me in the eye. I stepped closer to them, my voice as cold as ice. "On the day you went to register our marriage, he jumped into the river." As soon as I said those words, I saw Parker shake under his blanket. Mia jumped up so quickly she knocked over her chair. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her face going pale. I kept talking, my voice steady and calm. "The rice we were saving for our wedding, you gave it all to him. You said giving it to me would be a waste. But for him, it was enough food to last 6 months. I paused, letting my words sink in. "And while I was away, you even brought him into our home." Mia opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water, trying to find words but failing. I held up my hand to stop her from even trying to explain. Then I turned to look at Parker, who was still pretending to be unconscious in his hospital bed. "He's only pretending to be asleep," I said quietly, watching Parker's too still form on the hospital bed. "And here you are, ready to stay by his side all night." I knew Mia wasn't fooled by Parker's act. The truth was written all over her face. They had feelings for each other, plain and simple. "If you don't want to marry me, just say it straight out," I told her, my voice as cold as winter wind. "You didn't need to play these games with me." The moment I mentioned canceling the wedding, Mia's face filled with panic. "No!" she burst out. "I won't cancel it." I looked over at Parker again, still lying there, still playing unconscious. I had to give him credit. He could really commit to his act. Maybe that's how he managed to steal Mia's heart in my past life. "I only feel sorry for him," Mia tried to explain, her words coming out in a rush. "He has no family, barely has enough to eat. I just wanted to help him out. We're all human beings. Shouldn't we help each other?" Her voice got louder with each word, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. That's when I saw it, a single tear sliding down from the corner of Parker's closed eye. I couldn't help but laugh under my breath. "Do whatever you want," I said, shaking my head as I turned to leave. "I'm going home." "Go ahead," Mia called after me. "I'll come back later." I didn't take her words seriously. Instead, I went shopping and bought myself 2 new outfits, then met my parents for dinner. We had a wonderful time together, and I made sure to enjoy every minute. By the time I got home, it was late. Inside, everything was ready. All my important things were packed. Everything valuable had been moved. But even at 11 o'clock, Mia hadn't come back. That night, I sat down and finished writing an important letter, one that would expose all of Parker's bad behavior to the university officials. It was my goodbye gift to him, a special thank you for those few days he spent by my hospital bed in my past life. With Mia, I had to be more careful because our families were close. But ending the wedding? That couldn't be avoided. I wrote down everything, all her actions, how she'd been sneaking around with Parker. When I finished the letter, I sent it right away. By tomorrow morning, my mother would have it in her hands. The next morning, after getting ready, I stood in front of the old faded poster on my wall. My hand didn't shake as I made the final mark. Then, without looking back even once, I picked up my suitcase and walked out the door. It took me half a day to reach the train station. The place was packed with people, all of them heading somewhere new, starting their own journeys. Now I was one of them. For the first time in 2 lives, I wasn't going in circles anymore. I was finally moving forward. Just like that, Ethan vanished from my life like morning mist. His room stood empty and silent, with no goodbye note, no explanation. All he left behind were those strange marks on that old poster hanging on his wall. That's when it finally hit me. Those marks weren't counting the days since I tried to register our marriage. They were counting down the days until he would walk away forever. The truth came to me piece by piece, like a puzzle I never wanted to solve. On the very same day I went to file our marriage papers, Ethan had already taken them back. The wedding gifts my parents had given him sat untouched in his parents' home. Not a single item moved. 3 days after he disappeared, both our parents came to my house together. That's when I learned just how deeply Ethan hated Parker, though I still couldn't understand why. Every night, I asked myself the same question. Why couldn't Ethan give me one more chance? He had been right about Parker faking his illness in the hospital. How could I have been so blind? I had made up my mind that as soon as Parker left the hospital, I would cut him out of my life completely. I wouldn't let Ethan misunderstand anymore. I wouldn't let Parker come between us again. But Ethan never gave me the chance to make things right. He just disappeared, taking everything with him. I begged his parents not to cancel the wedding. Through tears, I promised I would change, that I could make him give us another try. But they just looked at me with sad, disappointed eyes and shook their heads. They knew what I was only beginning to understand. Ethan was never coming back. I spent hours sitting in his empty room, my hands shaking as I touched the places where his things used to be. This room held so many memories of him, of us. Without thinking, I opened the drawer where he always kept his important things, but it was empty too. That's when my legs gave out, and I crumpled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. The truth was clear. He had been planning to leave me all along. Then one day, Parker showed up at my door unexpectedly. His face was white with fear as he told me someone had reported him to the university, and now he'd been expelled. I just stared at him, feeling nothing. Then he started begging, asking if he could stay at my place, just for a little while. I didn't say a word. I just pushed him out and closed the door. How could I even think about helping him? Ethan had left because of Parker's presence in my life. If I let Parker stay in my life even a little bit now, I knew I would never have another chance with Ethan. Ever. But Parker wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept trying to stay close, kept finding ways to be part of my life. But it was too late for all of that now. Not long after, I got transferred to a city in the West. With Ethan gone, there was nothing holding me here anymore. The streets we'd walked together, the places we'd shared, they all felt empty now. Maybe somewhere new, somewhere far away, I could start over. But deep down, I knew the truth. I would always wonder about the life I could have had with Ethan, if only I hadn't been so blind. The memories of my childhood still shine bright in my mind. I remember that day my parents took me to visit another family. There was a little boy there, younger than me, with bright eyes and a shy smile. He followed me around like a faithful shadow, hanging on to every story I told. He would run into the fields and come back with handfuls of wildflowers, offering them to me with blushing cheeks. Years passed, and one day, a matchmaker came to our house. She talked about a young man who might make a good husband. Marriage wasn't really on my mind back then, but when she mentioned his name, something inside me stirred. I said yes without hesitation. Our love grew naturally, like flowers blooming in spring. He became my fiancé, and everything felt right in the world. But now, All of that happiness had slipped through my fingers like sand. After moving to the West, I wrote to him constantly, letter after letter, pouring my heart onto paper, but no answers ever came. Once, I gathered all my courage and went to see him in secret. He had grown taller, his shoulders broader, his face more handsome than before. He was surrounded by friends, their laughter floating through the air like music. I stood in the shadows, not daring to let him see me. When I heard Ethan was close to finishing university, I saved up money and bought a house. I thought maybe, just maybe, if he could find it in his heart to forgive me, I would ask him to marry me myself. I spent months practicing what I would say, imagining how it might go. On his graduation day, I bought the most beautiful roses I could find and went to look for him, but there was someone else standing by his side, someone who had the right to be there when I didn't. Later, I heard the news. He got married right after graduation. His wife gave him a daughter. People said he became rich from playing the stock market well. His life moved forward while mine stood still. Years drifted by like leaves on a river. When I found myself lying on my deathbed, strange visions came to me. I saw another life, a different path, one where Ethan and I did get married, where we raised our child together. But Parker was there too, always waiting in the shadows. I saw myself growing older, finally giving in to Parker's endless devotion. I watched as we adopted a child together, a little one who called me mother while Parker stayed faithfully by my side. Then the vision changed. I saw Parker standing over Ethan's hospital bed, whispering terrible words to him. I tried to stop it, tried to reach out and change what was happening, but my body wouldn't move. A steady beeping filled my ears, growing louder and louder. Suddenly my eyes snapped open. My mind felt foggy, but there he was, Ethan, walking out of the clerk's office. I watched in horror as he dropped our marriage certificate into the trash, like it meant nothing at all. Pain shot through my chest like lightning. I ran after him, believing with all my heart that this time would be different. This time I could make things right. But the beeping sound grew louder, drowning out everything else. The world started to fade away, turning darker and darker, until finally, there was nothing left but darkness. My second chance slipped away, just like my first, leaving me with nothing but regret and memories of what could have been.